Today, more than 8 billion people share this small blue planet. We fill every corner of it, from icy poles to crowded cities, from deep forests to deserts that once seemed lifeless. But imagine rewinding time to nearly 1 million years ago. The world back then would have looked shockingly different. Earth was colder, harsher, and almost empty of people. In fact, there was a moment when our entire species came dangerously close to vanishing forever. According to new genetic discoveries, somewhere between 930,000 and 800,000 years ago, the ancestors of modern humans faced an unimaginable crisis. Their population collapsed to fewer than 1,300 individuals, barely enough to keep humanity alive. Picture that for a second. Every single human being that existed could have fit into one small village. One drought, one volcanic eruption, one harsh winter, and we might never have been here at all. Scientists only recently uncovered this story through a groundbreaking genetic model known as FitCole. It allows researchers to look backward through time, using the DNA of thousands of people alive today to reconstruct how many ancestors once walked the Earth. What they found stunned the scientific world, a severe bottleneck that lasted more than 100,000 years, during which humanity's survival hung by a fragile thread. In this journey, we will uncover how that near-extinction event shaped everything that followed, from the birth of new human species to mysterious changes in our DNA, to the rise of our skin tones and the way ancient humans blended their bloodlines. This isn't just science, it's the incredible story of how our ancestors turned despair into survival, and survival into the spark that created us all. After that fragile beginning, let's travel back into that distant world where our ancestors struggled to survive. Between 930,000 and 813,000 years ago, the Earth plunged into one of its most brutal ice ages. Massive glaciers crept across continents, oceans cooled, and droughts struck Africa and Eurasia. The landscape turned unforgiving, food was scarce, habitats shrank, and early humans faced a slow, relentless squeeze from nature itself. It was during this period that the population of our ancestors, those who would eventually give rise to all modern humans, collapsed to its lowest point in history. According to the study known as genomic inference of a severe human bottleneck, there were only about 1,280 breeding individuals left on the entire planet. Imagine the whole of humanity reduced to a single village, scattered across dangerous lands, fighting to endure in a world of ice and dust. For over 100,000 years, that tiny group held on. They hunted what little game remained, gathered roots and fruits when the seasons allowed, and likely huddled together in small family bands for warmth and safety. Most species, when their numbers fall that low, simply vanish. Yet somehow, through a mix of luck, adaptation, and an unbreakable will to live, our ancestors survived. But how do we even know this happened? After all, fossils from this time are rare. The Earth itself erased most traces of those ancient lives. To solve that mystery, scientists turned to something we all carry inside us, our DNA. They developed a revolutionary genetic model called FitCole, short for Fast Infinitesimal Time Coalescent Process. It analyzes thousands of human genomes to calculate how population sizes change through time. Think of it as a time machine built from code and chemistry, one that allows scientists to watch humanity's rise and fall through genetic memory. By studying more than 3,000 genomes from people living across Africa and beyond, researchers discovered clear signs of this ancient population crash. The genetic diversity we see today, those tiny variations that make each of us unique, once nearly disappeared. In fact, the study estimates that our ancestors lost about 98.7% of their reproductive population during this crisis. For 100 millennia, humanity hovered on the edge of extinction, yet somehow maintained just enough stability to endure. This revelation explains a strange gap in the fossil record between Africa and Eurasia, a silence that had puzzled scientists for decades. It wasn't that fossils were missing by accident. There were simply too few humans left to leave many behind. What's remarkable is that this bottleneck may have shaped who we are today. With so few survivors, certain genetic traits could have become stronger, helping future generations adapt better to changing climates. It was evolution's harshest filter, and those who passed through it carried the blueprint of every human life that would follow. From that tiny spark of survival, a new chapter of human evolution was about to begin. As the ice tightened its grip on the planet, climate became the silent architect of our destiny. The world our ancestors inhabited was in turmoil, glaciers expanded, sea levels dropped, and vast regions turned into barren plains. Africa, once rich with rivers and forests, faced devastating droughts that fractured the land into isolated pockets of survival. For early humans, migration wasn't a choice, it was a desperate response to hunger and cold. Over time, those who survived the bottleneck began to scatter, following rivers, coastlines, and faint trails of vegetation. Separated by mountains, deserts, and oceans, small groups of humans became isolated for thousands of generations. When populations stop interbreeding, their genes begin to drift apart. That's how evolution works slowly, silently. It molds life into new forms. Scientists now believe this long isolation may have sparked one of the most significant branching events in human history, the split between Homo sapiens, Neanderthals, and Denisovans. Somewhere between 765,000 and 550,000 years ago, just after the bottleneck ended, our ancestors diverged into three distinct paths. It's possible that the very pressure of survival during the harshest ice age forced this evolutionary leap. Think of it this way. The bottleneck acted as a great filter, shrinking the population down to its most resilient members. Then, when the climate eased and new environments opened up, these survivors adapted in different ways. Those who remained in Africa continued evolving into the ancestors of modern humans. Others, venturing north into colder climates, began developing traits that would define the Neanderthals and the Denisovans: stronger builds, different metabolisms, and unique adaptations to cold. The fossil record supports this timeline. After a long silence, new forms of humans suddenly appear across Africa and Eurasia, proof that something transformative had happened. It's as if the planet itself had reset the evolutionary clock and given humanity another chance. This idea reframes the bottleneck not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. It was nature's crucible, forging the resilience that allowed humanity to thrive in every corner of the Earth. Without that extreme climate pressure, we might never have developed the flexibility and intelligence that define us today. Our ancestors didn't just endure the Ice Age, they were sculpted by it. Out of that frozen struggle emerged the first branches of the human family tree, each carrying a piece of the story that still lives within our DNA. As humanity was taking shape in scattered corners of the ancient world, an extraordinary event was unfolding deep within our DNA, a silent transformation that would forever set humans apart from every other great ape. Somewhere around 900,000 years ago, two ancestral chromosomes fused together, forming what we now call chromosome 2. It was a tiny molecular accident, but one with monumental consequences. In other primates, like chimpanzees and gorillas, there are 48 chromosomes. Humans have 46. The reason is this fusion, a rare end-to-end joining of two ancient chromosomes into one. At the point of contact, scientists have found the unmistakable scars of this union: inverted telomere sequences, the remnants of a former centromere, and a patch of degenerated satellite DNA. These genetic fingerprints tell us this fusion was not imagined. It truly happened inside the cells of one of our ancestors. Recent research using a new genomic algorithm has even estimated the timing of that event. By counting subtle mutations known as weak to strong substitutions, scientists place the fusion around 0.9 million years ago, give or take 500,000 years. That means this extraordinary shift occurred right in the middle of the population bottleneck at the very moment our species was struggling to survive. It's tempting to wonder, could the fusion itself have played a role in that struggle? Some scientists believe it may have disrupted fertility or changed how genes were expressed, adding new evolutionary pressures to an already fragile population. Others think it might have stabilized parts of the genome, helping our ancestors endure and adapt. Either way, this fusion left a permanent mark, one that every living human still carries in every cell. The evidence is universal. Neanderthals and Denisovans share this fused chromosome, which means it happened before our lineages split apart. It's one of the rarest kinds of evolutionary signatures, a literal joining of two ancestral threads into a single strand of destiny. Hidden in that fusion is the story of how the chaos of chance became the order of humanity. While our DNA was quietly reshaping itself, another transformation was happening on the surface of our bodies in the color of our skin. For a long time, people believed that light skin evolved only after humans migrated out of Africa, adapting to regions with less sunlight. But new genetic research reveals a far more complex and ancient story, one that began long before modern humans even existed. Scientists studying genes linked to pigmentation found that many of the variants responsible for lighter skin tones are over 900,000 years old. Some appeared as early as 270,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens emerged. Even more astonishing, several of these variants are shared not just among modern Africans, but also with Neanderthals and Denisovans. This means that the genetic palette for both dark and light skin was already mixed into humanity's DNA long before our species took shape. Take, for example, the San hunter-gatherers of southern Africa, one of the most ancient human populations on Earth. They live under the blazing African sun, yet their skin is relatively light compared to many other African groups. Genetic studies show that the San people carry ancient versions of these pigmentation genes, living evidence that our skin color has never been a simple black or white story. Now, think back to the bottleneck. When our ancestors' population shrank to barely more than 1,000 individuals, much of the world's genetic diversity disappeared. But a few rare traits survived. It's possible that some of those early pigmentation variants were among the ones that made it through that evolutionary sieve. Over time, as humans spread across different climates, those ancient genes would resurface in different combinations, painting humanity in every shade we see today. The truth is, skin color isn't a line dividing us, it's a reflection of adaptation, endurance, and shared ancestry. The light and dark within our genes remind us that all humans are variations of the same enduring story, the story of survival written in light. From the genes that colored our skin to the chromosomes that shaped our bodies, the story of humanity continued to unfold not in isolation, but through connection. As the ice began to retreat and the world grew a little warmer, our ancestors started to move again. Step by step, over tens of thousands of years, they walked out of Africa, following rivers, crossing valleys, and venturing into new and uncharted lands. What followed were not just migrations, they were waves of mixing, moments when distant human lineages met again and shared both blood and knowledge. According to modern genomic research, there were at least 3 great waves of migration into Eurasia. The first began nearly 2 million years ago, when the earliest archaic humans, sometimes called super-archaics, left Africa and settled across Asia. Then, about 700,000 years ago, the ancestors of Neanderthals and Denisovans pushed northward, encountering those ancient settlers and even interbreeding with them. Finally, only about 50,000 years ago, modern humans, Homo sapiens, took their own leap beyond Africa, meeting and mingling with both Neanderthals and Denisovans. Genetic studies reveal at least 5 separate episodes of interbreeding between these different human populations. Some of the DNA from those encounters still lives inside us today, affecting traits such as immune response, fat metabolism, and even how our bodies handle cold climates. In other words, the survival of our species didn't depend on isolation, but on exchange. The merging of lineages gave us strength, resilience, and the ability to adapt to nearly every environment on Earth. Yet these unions also created subtle barriers, small genetic incompatibilities that, over time, would help define separate species. Evolution, it seems, uses both connection and separation to shape life. When we trace those ancient migrations, we find that humanity's story is not about pure lines or perfect origins. It's about the crossings, the moments when paths converged, when survival meant unity. Across continents and millennia, the blood of countless ancestors flowed together to create one shared inheritance, the story of us all. From a frozen world nearly 1 million years ago to the vast civilizations that now span the Earth, the story of humanity has always been one of survival against impossible odds. There was a time when fewer than 1,300 of our ancestors clung to life, when the wind howled through empty valleys and the future of humankind balanced on a thread. And yet, they endured. Every one of us living today is proof of their resilience, the living echo of a victory written not in monuments, but in our genes. Through that ancient bottleneck came the spark of transformation, the birth of new human branches, the fusion of chromosomes, the endless shades of our skin, and the crossing of bloodlines across continents. The DNA inside us carries the record of that struggle, the cold they survived, the migrations they dared, and the choices that shaped the destiny of our species. When we look at ourselves, our differences in color, language, or culture, we are seeing chapters of the same book, written in many voices but telling one story. A story of connection, not division. A story that began with a handful of survivors who refused to disappear. So the next time you gaze at your hands or look into the eyes of another person, remember this. You are the result of 1 billion years of persistence, of trial, and of hope. Humanity was nearly erased, but it didn't give up, and that is the reason you are here to listen to this story today. We are all part of the same miracle, the miracle of survival, and that, above all, is our shared human heritage.